Hello and welcome to Inside Tennis Football's practice facility. I'm Ryan Sylvia. This is Noah Taylor, and we are with VolReport.com on the Rivals Network. It is Tennessee's bye week, so we met with Josh Heupel and some players today, and they talked about that Oklahoma game and also the upcoming bye week. So we'll start with what Josh Heupel had to say with you, Noah.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting to hear him talk about Jason Jenkins a little bit. A guy he kind of heaped a lot of praise on today. A defensive lineman, in this group that we've heard a lot about the depth here. And Tennessee displayed that. They've displayed it through 4 games, but especially in that Oklahoma game, a guy that gets in there and comes up with really one of the defining plays of the game, comes up with the safety to kind of kill some momentum there for Oklahoma that they just never really recovered from. But it was interesting to hear him talk about Jenkins because it's a guy who's kind of had a little bit of an interesting journey. Obviously coming from the Northeast down here in 2022 has kind of had to bide his time to get on the field. I think at one point, that he was going to enter the transfer portal in the spring and decided to come back. And now you're seeing him kind of reap the rewards of his patience. And Heupel said he's a guy that hasn't really let any of those frustrations show of not playing. He's just kind of come to work, come to practice, and now you're seeing that kind of pay off. And a guy who certainly looks the part on that defensive line, but is now kind of getting in that rotation and making some big plays, and I think that's been huge for Tennessee, obviously.
Yeah, Jason Jenkins, one of the players we talked to as well. If you want to provide some insight on what he told as well, his side of the story.
Yeah, he talked about just leaning on his faith and when he wasn't getting playing time like he had wanted to, and I thought was really cool was how he talked about the reaction of his teammates and of Coach Gardner, when he came up with that safety, what the sideline was like. Obviously, a lot of guys happy for him. A lot of guys have kind of had a front row seat to that journey and his patience. But he said that he came back in here into film this week, and Gardner kind of pointed it out on that safety a couple times. So, yeah, a guy that I think that it's not like he just got in there against Chattanooga or Kent State. I mean, it was on the road and an SEC game and a big play. So I think that. Obviously a guy that's working his way into an even bigger role on this Tennessee defensive line that's veteran heavy right now, but he's certainly a guy that, could be a starter or play a bigger role next year when a lot of these guys have left.
Yeah, absolutely. Josh Heupel also talked about kind of the expectation for this bye week, what they want to improve on. One of the biggest things he talked about was communication. Kind of seemed more like an overall kind of improvement that he wants to see more than just this specific area needs to be specifically cleaned up. I'm sure kind of some of those procedure penalties and things like that goes along with communication will be something he looks at. But he also talked about Elijah Simmons, another defensive lineman that kind of stepped up in this Oklahoma game. He ends up getting the start, and he didn't put too much Elijah Simmons himself didn't put too much credit into kind of getting a start with this defensive line because they rotate so much, but did say that it's kind of a cool thing. He makes the first play of the game, though, against Oklahoma. Josh Heupel talks about it being kind of a tone setter and it kind of propelling, kind of setting the stage for what the defense ended up doing for the rest of that game. Elijah Simmons, when he talks about it, he kind of says, they're running that trap play with the wham block, which means you got the open edge rusher on one side who thinks he's got that open lane, and then with the wham, it's the tight end coming in and picking him up. But the issue with that is Elijah Simmons blows the whole thing up, and he's in the backfield. He comes up with a tackle for loss. So that whole scheme of running that trap play just immediately gets nullified, and Elijah says they barely went back to it after that. So being able to right out the gate just kind of jump on something and see a play and make sure it's for negative yards or that it goes nowhere, it ends up being a big deal because Oklahoma just kind of takes that page out of the playbook for most of the game and has to go to the other things that also didn't really work.
Yeah.
But so yeah, Elijah Simmons, kind of the trendsetter for Tennessee's defense, and overall he ends up having a really nice game. Him and Jason Jenkins with 2 really nice games. Also talked with Christian Harrison and Andre Carrick. What do you think about what they had to say?
Yeah, Christian Harrison was kind of interesting to listen to because of coming into, we had the Jordan Thomas injury early in fall camp, and a lot of questions throughout really the rest of fall camp on the defensive side was that star position between him and Boo Carter. And so really kind of I think the first opportunity we've gotten to talk to Christian Harrison, certainly since the season started, and it kind of gave us a little bit of insight about what that's been like for him. Obviously a guy that came in as a corner, kind of a new position for him, but said he's adjusting to it. Said he's felt pretty good about how he's done here 4 games in, but something he thinks he can get better at. But certainly Tennessee's got 2 options there that they've leaned heavily on. Obviously Boo had a big hit in that game that's kind of gone a little bit viral. and you know, Tennessee, I think, expects to have him back by Arkansas after leaving that game. But yeah, two guys that have kind of battled it out there, shared reps there, and it was just interesting to hear, you know, Christian Harrison's perspective on kind of fitting into that role. And there was a lot of expectations for him, I think, this season. You know, Tim Banks, Willie Martinez had a lot of good things to say about Christian Harrison coming into the year. I think they called him like the motor of the defense or the secondary, and certainly a guy that Tennessee's leaned on heavily here and has done, I think, a pretty good job holding that spot down with Boo Carter.
Yeah, you mentioned the Boo Carter injury, which I think the expectation right now is that he'll be fine going forward. But I should have led off with maybe the biggest news of the press conference with the tackle situation that Tennessee had. Obviously, Dane Davis and Larry Johnson manning the two tackle positions for the majority of the game, with Lance Hurd and John Campbell both out. John Campbell injured during the game. Lance Hurd ruled out before the game. So Josh Heupel was asked about the availability of those two starting tackles, and he said something along the lines of he anticipates them being good for the time they're in Fayetteville. He expects them to be good, but pretty much he seemed positive, like he did after the game, but also now a few days later seems pretty positive with the expectation that they should be good and ready to play. Andre Carrick, he was asked about those two tackle positions though, and he says that you know, he thought Larry Johnson did well filling in that left tackle role and kind of fitting in, getting the job done. Obviously, the expectation isn't that you're going to be as productive as Lance Hurd, but that he held his own. Then on the other side, Dane Davis, he said there's probably a couple plays he wants back. Probably if you look at the two strip sacks on Nico, they're both on his side of the line. But overall, he's, you know, that's a smart guy. He knows what he's doing out there, and they have a lot of trust in him as well. So that is kind of an important thing to know. As Andre also talked about, there's a lot of depth on this offensive line. I think he said it was the deepest offensive line he's been a part of, and you saw some of that depth come into play against Oklahoma, and it got a little sketchy at times here and there. But if you think about an offensive line's depth, it's typically pretty sketchy once you get past that first unit. So overall, considering the guys that had to step up and kind of fill in some roles, it seemed like Andre and Heupel were for the most part satisfied with how those guys responded to that challenge. But they'll do all from us here today inside Tennessee Football's practice facility. That'll be all the football press conferences this week with Heupel and company, but we'll be back to the normal schedule next week as they look ahead to a trip to Fayetteville to face the Arkansas Razorbacks. Monday press conference, Tuesday press conference. But we'll have coverage throughout the rest of this week, even though there's no game. We'll have coverage next week for game day and so on. So make sure you head over to VolReport.com for all the coverage you need. Tennessee football, basketball, baseball, softball, whatever it is, and subscribe to the YouTube channel. Links to everything needs in the description. Thank you for watching.